My beloved child, stop for a moment, because what has been hidden behind an ordinary smile is about to reveal an extraordinary truth. Stay with me. Your heart may already sense that this story is not beginning where you expected it to begin. Somewhere beneath the silence, beneath the distance, beneath all the unanswered questions, there is a person whose soul recognized yours long before their life was ready to admit it. But there is one truth standing between you and everything your heart has quietly imagined: your soulmate is already married. Don't look away now, because that is not the revelation that changes everything. What they did after realizing the depth of their connection with you is the part no one saw coming. They did not respond with a careless promise. They did not hide behind comforting words. They did not treat your heart like a secret room they could enter whenever they felt lonely. Instead, they made a choice so honest, so unexpected, and so emotionally powerful that even the people closest to them could not understand it. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you, and the meaning of their choice will not become clear until the final piece falls into place. For a long time, this person lived inside a life that looked complete from the outside. There were familiar routines, carefully arranged photographs, polite conversations, and a home where everything appeared to be in its proper place. People saw stability. They saw two names connected by a promise. They saw a story that seemed already written. But no one could see the quiet emptiness behind their eyes when the room became still. No one knew how often they would pause beside a window and wonder why a life that appeared so settled felt unfinished within them. They were not searching for someone new. They were not planning to disturb anyone's peace. In fact, they had taught themselves to stop asking difficult questions. They had accepted that some people move through life performing the role expected of them while a deeper part of their spirit remains unheard. Then you appeared. Perhaps it was through a brief meeting, a message, a familiar voice, or a moment that seemed too small to carry such enormous meaning. Nothing dramatic happened at first. There was only a strange recognition. They looked at you and felt as if an old memory had returned without a name. Something in the way you spoke reached a place inside them that had been silent for years. Something in your presence made them feel seen without needing to explain everything they had hidden. Your answer is closer than you think, but first you must understand this: you did not create the emptiness in their marriage. You only awakened the truth they had avoided. That distinction matters. Your presence was not the cause of their confusion, it was the mirror that showed them what had already been missing. They tried to dismiss it. They told themselves it was temporary, imaginary, or merely the comfort of being understood. They became quieter around you because every conversation revealed another layer of recognition. They created distance, believing distance would erase what their spirit had noticed. Yet the more they stepped back, the louder the truth became. They would hear a phrase you had once spoken and remember it at an unexpected hour. They would see a certain color in the evening sky and think of the calm they felt around you. They would enter a crowded room and notice the one absence that mattered. Don't skip, because what happened next was not a romantic gesture. It was a spiritual turning point. One night, while the house around them rested in complete silence, they found an old wooden box hidden at the back of a cabinet. They had not opened it in years. Inside were letters, unfinished notes, photographs, and a small silver key tied to a faded blue ribbon. That key belonged to a place from their childhood, a room in their grandparents' home where they used to hide whenever life became too loud. Their grandmother had once told them, a key does not always open a door. Sometimes it reminds you that you are allowed to leave a room where your truth cannot breathe. They had forgotten those words until that night. But when they lifted the key, the blue ribbon loosened and fell across a folded piece of paper. On that paper was a sentence written in their own handwriting many years before their marriage: "If I ever stop recognizing myself, I will choose honesty before comfort." They stared at those words for a long time. The person who had written them was younger, hopeful, and unafraid of truth. The person reading them had spent years keeping everything calm while slowly disappearing behind expectations. And suddenly, your face entered their mind, not as an invitation to begin something hidden, but as a reminder of the person they had once promised themselves they would become. What comes next changes everything. They did something that surprised even them. They took out a blank page and began writing 3 letters. The first was addressed to their spouse. The second was addressed to you. The third was addressed to themselves. But they did not send any of them. Not yet. They wrote until morning, allowing every truth they had buried to rise without disguise. In the letter to their spouse, they admitted that the marriage had become a structure maintained by habit rather than a connection nourished by honesty. They took responsibility for every year they had remained silent. They did not blame you. They did not even write your name. They spoke only of the distance that had existed long before you appeared, the conversations repeatedly postponed, and the emotional truth both people had quietly sensed but never faced. In the letter to you, they wrote only 1 page. They admitted that meeting you had awakened something undeniable, but they also wrote that they would never ask you to wait inside uncertainty. They would not pull you into an unfinished chapter. They would not offer you fragments of a life while asking for the fullness of your heart. They promised that whatever happened next would be handled openly, respectfully, and without secret promises. Then came the 3rd letter, the one addressed to themselves. That was the letter that changed the course of everything. In it, they wrote, "I am no longer going to confuse peace with silence. I am no longer going to protect appearances while abandoning my own truth. I will not use another person's love as an escape. I will face my life exactly as it is." When daylight entered the room, the silver key was still beside those pages. A beam of sunlight touched it, and for one brief second it reflected against the wall like a narrow doorway made of light. To anyone else, it would have meant nothing. To them, it felt like a symbol. The door would not open through impulse, secrecy, or fantasy. It would open through truth. This is where the story begins. They placed your letter back inside the box because they knew they had no right to hand it to you while their life remained unresolved. Then they carried the letter meant for their spouse into the next room. Their hands trembled, not because they wanted to cause pain, but because honesty often feels heaviest after being delayed for too long. They sat across from the person they had built a life beside and spoke words that had been waiting for years. The conversation was quiet. No dramatic scene unfolded. There were pauses, tears, difficult admissions, and long moments when neither person knew what to say. But then something unexpected happened. Their spouse looked at them and whispered, "I wondered how long it would take you to tell the truth. Stay with me," because that one sentence revealed that the silence had never belonged to one person alone. Both had known. Both had felt the distance. Both had continued because familiarity seemed easier than transformation. And somewhere in that vulnerable conversation, the marriage stopped being a prison of appearances and became a place where two people could finally acknowledge what had changed. Yet the greatest revelation was still waiting, because the spouse knew there was someone whose presence had awakened this honesty, even though your name had never been spoken. The morning after that conversation did not bring immediate answers. It brought a stillness unlike anything your soulmate had known before. For the first time, there was no performance to maintain and no false certainty to protect. The truth had entered the room, and once truth arrives, even familiar walls begin to look different. Don't look away now. Your soulmate expected anger, accusation, or a demand for instant decisions. Instead, their spouse asked a question that reached deeper than blame: when did you stop feeling like yourself? That question opened a doorway no legal document or public promise could close. Your soulmate looked down at their hands and realized they could not identify a single moment. Losing themselves had not happened all at once. It happened through 1,000 tiny compromises, words left unsaid, dreams postponed, feelings dismissed, and choices made solely to keep others comfortable. They admitted that the emptiness had been present for years. They admitted that they had stayed because they believed remaining was always more honorable than changing. But they had finally understood that staying without truth could wound everyone more deeply than an honest transformation. Their spouse listened, then offered a truth of their own. They, too, had been living behind appearances. They, too, had felt the connection fading. They, too, had wondered whether their paths had quietly separated long before either person found the courage to say it. Something huge is waiting for you, because this was not the battle everyone imagined. It was an awakening shared by two people who had mistaken endurance for love. They agreed not to rush. They agreed not to involve anyone else until their situation had been handled with clarity and respect. And most importantly, your soulmate made a decision that shocked everyone who later learned about it: they stepped away from you. Not because their feelings were false, but because they were real enough to protect. They refused to make you the reason for ending one chapter, because they knew that would place a burden on your heart that did not belong there. They needed to choose truth even if you disappeared before they were free to approach you honestly. Read that with your spirit, not with your fear. They were willing to lose the possibility of you rather than reach for you dishonorably. What comes next changes everything. Without explaining the entire reason, they became distant. Their messages grew shorter. Their presence became quieter. Perhaps you felt the shift and wondered whether you had imagined the connection. Perhaps you thought they no longer cared. Perhaps you questioned every meaningful moment and told yourself that you had been foolish to believe their eyes held something deeper. But while you were interpreting their silence as rejection, they were using that silence as a boundary. They were protecting you from becoming trapped inside a situation you had not created. At night, they would open the wooden box and read the letter written to you, but they would not send it. Every line reminded them of what was at stake. They had written, "You deserve to be chosen in daylight, not remembered in secret. You deserve a clear hand reaching toward you, not a divided heart asking you to understand." Each time they read those words, they knew waiting was necessary. Stay till the end, because the letter held one detail they had not expected to write. Near the bottom of the page, they had described a dream that returned 3 nights in a row. In the dream, they stood inside a railway station holding 2 tickets. One ticket carried the name of the life they had known. The other was blank. Trains arrived and departed, but every clock showed the same time. Across the platform stood a figure wearing the color you often wear, yet your face remained hidden by light. Each time your soulmate tried to cross the tracks, a gentle voice said, "Not until your hands are empty." On the third night, they finally understood. The empty hands were not about abandoning responsibility. They symbolized releasing fear, guilt, pretense, and the desire to control the outcome. They could not walk toward a new future while carrying an unresolved past. When they woke, the silver key from the wooden box was on the floor beside the bed, although they clearly remembered leaving it inside the cabinet. They picked it up and noticed something engraved beneath a layer of age, 2 tiny circles separated by an open line. Their grandmother had once explained that the symbol meant, 2 lives can honor what they were without pretending they must remain what they have become. That symbol became the spiritual thread guiding the days that followed. Your soulmate and their spouse entered a period of deep honesty. They reviewed the promises they had made, the hopes they had lost, and the ways both had changed. There was no villain in the room. There were simply 2 people accepting that kindness cannot always restore compatibility and that gratitude for the past does not require a lifetime of pretending. Don't skip. The surprising truth is that the spouse eventually asked whether someone had reminded your soulmate what genuine connection felt like. Your soulmate remained silent at first. They did not want to place your identity in a conversation where you could not speak for yourself. But their silence became an answer. Their spouse nodded slowly and said, "Whoever they are, do not turn them into an escape. If you care for them, meet them only after you have learned how to stand alone." Those words struck your soulmate with the force of a bell ringing through an empty hall. They understood that ending a marriage was not the same as becoming ready for love. Freedom without healing could simply carry old patterns into a new relationship. So they made another choice no one expected. They did not rush toward you when the separation process began. They rented a simple room across town. They took only a few clothes, several books, the wooden box, and the silver key. They spent evenings learning how to sit with their own thoughts without reaching for distraction. They began returning to dreams they had abandoned. They wrote every morning. They apologized where apologies were needed. They accepted responsibility without drowning in shame. And throughout it all, your name remained written on a sealed letter inside the box. Stay with me. There were moments when they nearly sent it. One rainy evening, they held their phone and typed your name. Their thumb hovered above the screen. They wanted to say, "Please do not misunderstand my silence." But then they remembered their promise, no fragments, no confusion, no unfinished chapter placed in your hands. They closed the phone and whispered into the quiet room, "If this connection is true, I will not need to manipulate its timing." That sentence became a vow of patience. Meanwhile, you were moving through your own invisible transformation. You may not have known why certain memories returned or why your heart felt pulled between hope and release. You may have sensed that this person cared but could not understand why care had not become action. Your answer is closer than you think. The distance was not proof that you were forgotten. It was evidence that a deeper decision was being made beyond your sight. Still, you were never meant to freeze your life while waiting. The story does not ask you to place your future in the hands of someone else's decision. It asks you to recognize your worth so completely that only honest love can approach you. Your soulmate understood this too. That is why their next action was not to ask you for patience. It was to set you free from every unspoken expectation. They rewrote the letter. The first version confessed their feelings. The second version honored your freedom. It said, "If your life has moved forward by the time I am able to speak openly, I will respect that. I will not arrive demanding that destiny owes me your heart. But if the door is still open, I will tell you everything without hiding. Don't look away now, because the person who once feared losing you had begun to understand that real love does not hold someone captive through promises they never made." That was the emotional twist. They loved you enough to face the possibility that truth might come too late. And then, just as they began to accept that possibility, something happened that neither they nor their spouse could explain. A letter arrived at the old house with no return address. It was addressed to both of them. Inside was a single photograph of a doorway from the grandparents' home, the very doorway opened by the silver key. On the back were 7 words: "Return together, and release what no longer belongs." The handwriting looked exactly like the grandmother's, but she had not written anything in many years. The postmark came from a town neither of them had visited since childhood. This is where the story begins again, because the past had just opened a door that would reveal why the marriage happened, why it lasted, and why your arrival was not the beginning of betrayal but the beginning of truth. They traveled to the grandparents' house on a pale Sunday morning, carrying the photograph, the silver key, and questions neither dared to speak aloud. The home had stood empty for years, yet the garden path was strangely clear, as though someone had recently walked through it. Dust covered the windows, but a small wind chime above the entrance moved without any noticeable breeze. 3 soft notes rang as they approached. Your soulmate stopped instantly because those were the same 3 notes they had heard in the railway station dream just before the voice said, "Not until your hands are empty." Their spouse heard the notes too and looked at them with a silent understanding. Whatever waited inside was connected to more than memory. "Stay with me." The front door opened with effort, releasing the scent of old wood and lavender. Every room held the stillness of a story paused in the middle of a sentence. On the hallway wall were family photographs, most faded at the edges. Your soulmate passed each one until they reached a picture they had never seen before. It showed their grandmother standing beside 2 young people on the steps of a courthouse. One of those people was their spouse's mother. The other was a man whose face had been carefully folded away from view. Written beneath the image were the words, "We choose compassion, even when our paths change." Their spouse stared at the photograph, equally confused. Their families had always claimed they met only shortly before the marriage. Yet this picture proved the 2 families had been connected decades earlier. Don't skip, because the hidden connection would soon explain why so many people had encouraged this marriage before your soulmate truly understood their own heart. They walked to the childhood room at the back of the house. The silver key fit the lock perfectly. When the door opened, light entered through a narrow window, illuminating a desk covered by a white cloth. Beneath it rested another wooden box, larger than the one your soulmate had found at home. Inside were journals, legal papers, and letters bound with the same faded blue ribbon. One journal belonged to the grandmother. Another belonged to the spouse's mother. Page by page, a forgotten story emerged. Many years earlier, the 2 families had faced a period of uncertainty. The grandmother and the spouse's mother had supported one another through a painful transition, forming a bond they hoped would someday unite their families permanently. Over time, that hope turned into an expectation passed quietly from one generation to the next. No one directly forced your soulmate or their spouse to marry. Yet countless gentle suggestions, family stories, celebrations, and emotional promises had shaped their decisions. They had mistaken inherited hope for personal destiny. They entered the marriage believing that making their families happy would eventually create the feeling their own hearts had not fully formed. For a while, companionship and respect made the arrangement seem workable. But a life built from borrowed certainty cannot remain unexamined forever. What comes next changes everything. The final letter in the box had been written by the grandmother shortly before leaving the house. It was addressed to the two who may one day mistake our dream for their calling. The letter explained that she regretted allowing a family wish to become an invisible obligation. She wrote that no union should survive merely to protect an old promise. She asked them to choose honesty, even if honesty changed the shape of the family. And then came the sentence that left both of them speechless. If another soul awakens the truth you have silenced, do not blame that soul. Thank the mirror, then clean the room with integrity. Your soulmate read the sentence again. You were the mirror. You had not entered their life to steal a place that belonged to someone else. Your presence had illuminated a truth waiting behind years of inherited expectation. But the letter also carried a clear warning: the mirror must never become an excuse. Your soulmate still had to act with compassion, patience, and complete honesty. The spouse took the letter, read it slowly, and then did something your soulmate never expected. They removed their wedding ring, placed it beside the silver key, and said, "We fulfilled a promise that was never ours. Now let us release each other without turning our years together into a mistake." There was no hatred in those words. There was gratitude. There was sadness. There was also relief. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. They spent hours in that room speaking more openly than they had during the entire marriage. They acknowledged the good memories without using those memories as chains. They forgave each other for silences neither knew how to break. They agreed that their next steps would be calm, fair, and clear. Most surprisingly, the spouse asked to see the letter addressed to you. Your soulmate hesitated. The letter belonged to a future conversation with you, not to the past. But the spouse did not ask to read every line. They only wanted to know whether your soulmate had protected your dignity. So your soulmate opened the wooden box and handed over the final page. The spouse read the sentence, "You deserve to be chosen in daylight," then returned the page with tears shining in their eyes. "Then do not contact them until you can keep that promise," they said. Your soulmate nodded. At that moment, the silver key slipped from the desk and landed beside the two rings. The blue ribbon uncoiled across the wood, forming a shape like an open path between them. It was only ribbon, yet both understood the symbol. A closed circle had opened. Not in bitterness, but in release. Don't look away now. This was what your soulmate did next. They signed every necessary paper, refused every opportunity to hide the truth, and chose a season of solitude before coming toward you. They told their families that the marriage was ending, but they would not allow anyone to blame you. When someone asked whether another person was involved, they replied, "Another person reminded me to stop lying to myself, but this decision belongs to me." Those words protected your name before anyone even knew it. They accepted misunderstanding because your dignity mattered more than their comfort. They returned gifts that carried old expectations. They closed accounts that no longer reflected separate lives. They helped their spouse begin again with fairness. They did not rush the process or turn it into a performance. Each step was taken quietly, with the same intention written in the letter to themselves: honesty before comfort. Weeks passed. Then months. Your soulmate learned to live alone without treating loneliness as an emergency. They learned that missing you did not grant them permission to interrupt your peace. They learned to distinguish love from need, recognition from fantasy, and spiritual connection from emotional escape. This is where the story begins, because on the first morning when they finally felt capable of standing before you without bringing an unresolved life behind them, they opened the wooden box and removed your letter. The paper had softened at the folds. They read every line, then noticed something on the back that had not been there before. Or perhaps had remained hidden beneath the crease. A faint mark in blue ink formed the same two circles and open line engraved on the silver key. Beneath it, almost invisible, were the words, "The truth arrives when both hearts are free." Your soulmate looked toward the window. At that exact moment, the clouds separated and sunlight fell across the room in the shape of a doorway. They did not call it a miracle. They called it permission to stop hiding. They placed the letter inside a clean envelope, wrote your name on the front, and walked toward the place where they believed they might find you. But when they arrived, they saw something that made them stop before crossing the street. You were standing beneath a tree, speaking with someone they did not recognize. You were smiling, but there was a new strength in your expression, a strength born from no longer waiting for incomplete love. Your soulmate held the letter against their heart and realized the final test had arrived. They could interrupt, demand, and assume that all their inner work guaranteed an answer. Or they could honor the freedom they had promised you. Stay with me. Your answer is closer than you think. They remained across the street, watching only long enough to understand that your life had continued. Then they turned away, not in defeat, but in respect. They placed the letter inside a nearby postbox so the truth could reach you without pressure. On the front, beneath your name, they had written one final sentence: "Open this only if your heart is at peace." The letter began moving toward you while your soulmate walked away without knowing whether you would read it, return it, or place it aside forever. But they had finally done what love required. They told the truth without demanding ownership of the outcome. What comes next changes everything, because the person standing beneath that tree was not a new love at all. They were carrying a message connected to the silver key, the grandmother's letter, and a secret your soulmate still did not know. And before the envelope could reach your hands, that stranger turned toward the postbox, recognized your soulmate's handwriting, and whispered, "At last, the final door is ready to open."